I've never been a fan of traveling. Vacation is one thing, but traveling because of work has always felt exhausting. A little over a year ago, my company sent me to a small mountain town for a few days. It was only about a 3-hour drive, and everyone kept telling me how peaceful and beautiful the area was. Since my wife hated staying home whenever I had business trips, I suggested she come with me. She loved the idea. During the day I'd attend meetings while she explored the town, and every evening we'd spend together. It sounded like the perfect little getaway. Instead of booking a hotel, we rented a small cabin-like house hidden among tall pine trees. It wasn't completely isolated, but the nearest houses were far enough away that it felt private. The place looked cozy, almost like something from a postcard. As soon as we walked inside, my wife smiled. I could actually see us living somewhere like this. The house wasn't big, but it had a huge basement filled with old shelves, dusty boxes, broken furniture, and decades of stored belongings. We laughed about how the owners probably hadn't cleaned it in years. If I had known what was hiding down there, I would have turned around and left before unpacking. The first night was completely normal. We unpacked, ordered food, watched a movie, and went to sleep earlier than usual because I had to be at work before 7 the next morning. Around 6 o'clock my alarm rang. I reached over to turn it off and immediately realized my wife wasn't beside me. Half asleep, I jumped out of bed and searched the bedroom before finding her. Downstairs, she was sitting alone in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. She looked terrible. Dark circles surrounded her eyes, and she looked like she hadn't slept at all. "Everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "I don't know." She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "I woke up sometime during the night. So, I thought someone was standing in the corner of our bedroom. I waited for her to laugh. She didn't. It was too dark to tell for sure," she continued. I kept trying to focus my eyes, but every time I blinked, I felt like the figure was still there. Eventually she rolled over and tried forcing herself back to sleep. Just when she was about to drift off, she heard a faint sound from that same corner. A tiny movement, almost like someone shifting their weight. After that, she never slept again. At around 5 in the morning, she finally gave up, came downstairs, made coffee, and waited for sunrise. I tried convincing her that unfamiliar places can make our minds play tricks on us. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe it herself. Before leaving for work, I asked if she'd be okay staying alone. She forced a smile. "I'll shower, get dressed, and head into town. I don't really want to stay in this house by myself." I kissed her goodbye and left. About 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Her message simply read, "Something weird just happened." I called immediately. She explained that before getting into the shower, she had neatly folded the clothes she planned on wearing and placed them on the bed. When she came back, everything had moved. The clothes weren't folded anymore. Someone or something had unfolded them and laid each piece across the bed in a crooked line. She stood frozen. She tried convincing herself she had remembered wrong. Then she noticed something even stranger. Her socks were gone. She searched under the bed, inside the bathroom. Inside her suitcase. Everywhere. They had completely disappeared. Feeling uneasy, she grabbed another pair, rushed out of the house, ordered an Uber, and spent the rest of the morning wandering around town until I finished work. When I met her for lunch, she looked pale. She quietly told me everything. I believed every word. I just couldn't explain any of it. The rest of the afternoon was surprisingly peaceful. We walked around the shops, had dinner together, and by the time we drove back to the rental house, she seemed much calmer. For the first time all day, we actually laughed. I honestly thought whatever had happened that morning was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. That night, something else was waiting for us. That night, we went to bed a little earlier than usual. Neither of us mentioned the strange incidents from that morning. We tried to convince ourselves that everything had a logical explanation. Old houses creak, people misplace things. Tired minds imagine shadows. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Sometime after midnight, I felt someone shaking my shoulder. I opened my eyes and saw my wife sitting up right beside me. She looked terrified. "Listen," she whispered. I held my breath. At first, I heard nothing. Then footsteps. Very slow footsteps. Not outside. Inside the house. Someone was walking across the wooden floor. One step. Then another. Then silence. Then another slow step. My wife grabbed my arm so tightly, it actually hurt. "Please don't leave me," she whispered. Every instinct told me to stay in bed, but I couldn't ignore what we were hearing. If someone had broken into the house, I needed to know. I quietly got out of bed and picked up my phone, using its flashlight instead of turning on the lights. The hallway was empty. The living room looked exactly as we'd left it. The kitchen was silent. Nothing appeared out of place. Just before I headed back to the bedroom, I noticed something. The hallway closet door was standing open. I was almost certain it had been closed before we went to sleep. Trying to stay calm, I slowly opened it wider. Nothing. Just coats, a vacuum cleaner, and a few storage boxes. I searched every room. Nobody. Finally, I returned to the bedroom. "I checked everything," I told her. "There's no one here." She wanted to believe me, but neither of us slept much after that. The following morning, I had one final meeting before we could head home. My wife refused to stay inside the house while I was gone. She came with me into town, spent the morning walking around nearby shops, and met me for lunch once my meeting ended. While we were eating, she quietly asked, "Can we leave today?" I felt awful. "I wish we could." She looked at me hopefully. "I only have one meeting tomorrow morning. After that, we're done." She sighed. "So we have to spend one more night there." I nodded. "I'll book a hotel if you want." She shook her head. "We already spent enough on this rental." She tried smiling. "Let's just survive one more night." That afternoon, we returned to the house and packed almost everything into our suitcases so we could leave immediately after my meeting next morning. The less time we spent there, the better. We ordered pizza, watched random videos on my phone, and tried distracting ourselves. For a while. It actually worked. Then we heard it. Bang! A dull thump echoed from somewhere below us. My wife immediately froze. A few seconds later. Another sound, this one longer, almost like someone dragging something across a concrete floor. "The basement," she whispered. I listened carefully. Silence. "It's probably the house settling," I said. Even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't convinced. About 10 minutes later, another scrape. This time, it sounded much closer. My wife looked like she was about to cry. "I can't do this anymore." I stood up. "I'm checking the basement." She grabbed my wrist. "No, I have to. What if someone's down there? Then I'd rather know now than lie awake wondering." She reluctantly let go. I opened the basement door. A cold draft immediately drifted up the stairs. The light switch barely worked. One weak yellow bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows across the room. Every shelf was packed with dusty cardboard boxes. Old furniture sat covered with sheets. The air smelled damp. Like the basement hadn't been properly aired out in years. I slowly walked between the stacks of storage, checking every corner. Nothing. No movement. No sound. I actually laughed to myself. Maybe we'd let our imaginations get out of control. I turned toward the stairs. Then something caught my eye. Far back in the darkest corner of the basement. Someone was standing perfectly still. At first, I genuinely thought it was a coat rack, or maybe a mannequin. The figure never moved. I stared for several seconds. Then it blinked. Every hair on my body stood up. The man wasn't wearing dark clothes. He wore a bright red baseball cap, and he had been standing there, watching me. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The man didn't charge toward me. He didn't speak. He simply stood there in the far corner of the basement, staring directly at me. His face was almost completely hidden in the darkness. but the red baseball cap made him impossible to miss. Then he blinked again. That tiny movement snapped me out of my shock. I spun around and sprinted toward the basement stairs without looking back. I nearly slipped climbing the steps. The second I reached the living room, I slammed the basement door behind me. My wife saw my face and immediately knew something was horribly wrong. What happened? Someone's down there. Her eyes widened. What? There's a man in the basement. She didn't ask another question. She grabbed her purse while I ran to collect our bags. Luckily, we'd packed almost everything earlier that afternoon. I carried 2 suitcases outside as fast as I could while she unlocked the car. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the keys. She threw the luggage into the trunk while I rushed back inside for our last bag and our phone chargers. Every second I spent inside that house felt dangerous. The silence was somehow worse than hearing footsteps. As I reached the bedroom, I grabbed the final suitcase and pulled both charging cables from the wall. Then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The basement door was open again. I knew I had closed it. I knew it. Slowly, my eyes shifted toward the hallway. The closet door, the same one that had mysteriously opened the previous night, was now cracked open too. Nobody was visible, but somehow the entire house felt occupied. It felt like someone was standing just out of sight. Watching. Waiting. I didn't waste another second. I ran straight for the front door. As I passed the hallway, I refused to look toward either doorway. Whatever was inside that house, I didn't want to see it again. I burst outside, threw the last suitcase into the trunk, jumped behind the wheel, and hit the gas before either of us had fully closed our doors. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. My wife was crying. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting another car to start following us. Thankfully, nothing did. Once we reached the highway, I finally called the property manager. I explained everything. I told her there was someone hiding inside the rental house. Instead of sounding concerned, she immediately became defensive. That's impossible, she insisted. Our cleaners inspected the property before your arrival. I don't care what your cleaners saw. I shouted. I saw a man in your basement. She continued, insisting I must have mistaken a shadow. Old furniture, or even a coat rack for a person. That was enough. I hung up. I wasn't interested in arguing with someone who hadn't been standing in that basement. We drove straight home that afternoon. Neither of us looked back. For weeks afterward, my wife struggled to sleep. Every little noise inside our own home startled her. Awake. She admitted something that still gives me chills. The first night, she paused before continuing. I don't think I imagined someone standing in our bedroom. I believed her. Now I understood exactly what she had seen. The man in the basement had probably never stayed in the basement. He had likely been moving through that house the entire time we were there. He could have entered our bedroom while we slept. He could have watched us without making a sound. He could have moved our clothes, taken the socks, opened the closet, walked through the hallway in the middle of the night, all while we convinced ourselves the house was simply making noises. The thought still makes me sick. We never heard from the rental company again. They never called to say whether anyone had been found. They never admitted there had been a break. And honestly, I stopped caring. Sometimes not knowing is easier than hearing the truth. One thing did change after that trip. Whenever I travel now, I don't rent secluded houses anymore. I don't care how beautiful they look in the photos. Give me a crowded hotel with security cameras, noisy hallways, and people walking around all night. Because after what happened in that rental house, I've learned something terrifying. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't someone who breaks into your house. Sometimes They were already living there before you arrived. I've always believed that if you're going to spend money on a vacation, you should do it right. A few years ago, I was dating a girl named Julie. We had both been working non-stop for months, so we decided to take a trip to Costa Rica. Neither of us had ever been there before, and after reading dozens of reviews, we booked one of the nicest beach resorts we could find. It wasn't cheap. In fact, it was probably the most expensive vacation I'd ever paid for. Still, we convinced ourselves it would be worth every dollar, and honestly, for the first 3 days, it absolutely was. The beaches looked like something from a postcard. The sunsets were unbelievable. Every member of the staff treated us incredibly well, and the resort itself felt more like a private paradise than a hotel. During the day, we'd relax by the pool, walk along the beach, or explore nearby trails. At night, we have dinner overlooking the ocean before finding somewhere quiet to enjoy the warm tropical air. Everything felt perfect. Until the third night. After dinner, we wandered down to the beach where performers were putting on a small fire show. We sat there for almost an hour watching flames dance against the dark sky while waves crashed behind us. By the time it ended, most of the guests had already gone back to their rooms. Julie looked over at me and smiled. "One more drink?" I laughed. "I was hoping you'd say that." We walked back to our suite, grabbed a bottle of tequila and a couple of mixers, then headed toward the outdoor hot tub. It was tucked away behind thick tropical plants, making it feel almost completely private. The sound of a nearby waterfall drowned out almost everything else. For nearly an hour we sat there talking, laughing, and enjoying the quiet. Then I noticed movement. Something shifted behind the bushes. At first, I assumed another guest was walking past. But this person wasn't walking. Whoever it was crouching. They were low enough that only the top of their head occasionally became visible through the leaves. They weren't trying to get somewhere. They were watching us. I stared for several seconds before finally shouting, "Hey!" The figure instantly disappeared. I climbed out of the hot tub as quickly as I could, nearly slipping on the wet concrete. By the time I reached the pathway, I caught a glimpse of someone hurrying away before disappearing around a corner. Julie called after me, "Forget it, just come back." But curiosity got the better of me. I ran to where I'd last seen the person. Nothing. The walkway was completely empty. No footsteps. No voices. No doors closing. It was as if whoever had been spying on us had simply vanished. I returned to the hot tub, trying to laugh it off. "Maybe they got lost." Julie forced a smile. "I don't think so." Neither of us felt comfortable staying there anymore. We grabbed our towels and started walking back toward our room. The path leading through the resort became surprisingly dark at night. Tall palm trees lined one side while thick jungle stretched across the other. The deeper we walked, the quieter everything became. Halfway to our building, something crashed through the bushes. Julie immediately grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. Normally you'd expect to hear animals moving around in a tropical forest, but this sounded different. Much heavier. Much closer. I stepped toward the edge of the trees, trying to see through the darkness. That's when I heard it. A strange buzzing noise. Not electronic. Not an insect. It sounded like someone making a deep, humming sound with their throat. The moment I focused on it, whatever was hiding in the trees suddenly sprinted deeper into the jungle. Branches snapped. Leaves shook violently. Then silence. Every instinct in my body told me we weren't alone. Julie whispered, "Please, let's just go." For the first time since arriving in Costa Rica, I genuinely felt like someone was following us. Neither of us said much after we got back to our suite. Julie locked the sliding patio door, double-checked the front door, and pulled the curtains shut. "You really think someone was watching us?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know someone was hiding behind those bushes." She nodded without saying another word. Neither of us wanted to think about it anymore. The following morning we woke up hoping the strange encounter had simply been some drunk guest acting like an idiot. After breakfast, we spent most of the day relaxing on the beach. The sunshine helped calm our nerves, and before long we were laughing again. For a while, everything felt normal. Around lunchtime, a man wearing what looked like a resort employee's uniform approached us carrying a professional camera. "Smile," he said cheerfully. Without thinking much about it, Julie and I leaned closer together while he snapped a couple of pictures. "There you go," he said with a grin before walking away. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but a minute later Julie frowned. "Isn't he supposed to be taking pictures of everyone?" I looked around. Families were scattered across the beach. Couples lounged by the water. Children were building SDL. Yes. Yet the photographer wasn't taking pictures of anyone else. In fact, he was gone, completely gone. There wasn't a single person with a camera anywhere nearby. I shrugged it off. Maybe he'd finished his shift. Maybe he'd been called somewhere else. Still, something about him bothered me. Later that afternoon we mentioned the previous night's incident to one of the staff members near the pool. We simply wanted them to be aware that someone had been sneaking around the hot tub after dark. The employee listened carefully and thanked us for letting him know. He promised security would keep a closer eye on that area. That made us feel a little better. After dinner we walked along the beach one last time before heading back to our room. Our flight home was early the next morning, so we planned on getting some sleep. Within minutes of lying down, we were both asleep. I have no idea what time it was when I woke up. The room was completely dark. For a second, I thought something had startled me awake. Then I heard it. Beep, click, a tiny electronic sound, almost like a digital camera taking a picture. I stayed perfectly still. A few seconds later, beep, click. This time, I was certain the sound was coming from outside our patio. I slowly sat up in bed. Our suite had a screened-in patio overlooking a small tropical garden. Because the screen blocked insects, we'd left the glass door slightly open so we could hear the ocean and the wildlife outside while we slept. Instead, I heard another camera shutter. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, froze. There was someone standing on the other side of the screen, completely motionless. All I could see was a dark silhouette. The person wasn't trying to hide anymore. They were facing directly toward our bed, watching us sleep. Every muscle in my body locked up. Then anger replaced the fear. I jumped out of bed and shouted, "Hey!" The figure immediately turned and ran. Within seconds they disappeared into the darkness between the palm trees. Julie shot upright. "What happened?" "Someone was taking pictures of us." Her face turned white. I slammed the patio door shut, locked it, and immediately called the front desk. I don't think I'd ever sounded that panicked in my life. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 security employees arrived. I explained everything from the beginning. The person hiding near the hot tub. The strange photographer on the beach. The camera outside our room. One of the guards interrupted me. "Sir, we don't have photographers walking around the beach." I stared at him. "What?" He shook his head. "If guests want photographs, they book them in advance." A cold chill ran down my spine. That meant the man with the camera hadn't worked for the resort at all. He had simply dressed like an employee, and somehow he had managed to stay close enough to us for 2 straight days without us realizing it. Security immediately searched the area while another employee offered to move us into a different suite closer to the main lobby. Neither Julie nor I argued. There was no way we spending another night in that room. We packed only the essentials and followed them across the property. For the rest of the night, neither of us slept. The security staff stayed with us until we finished moving into our new suite. This room was much closer to the main lobby, surrounded by other occupied rooms and monitored by several security cameras. It instantly felt safer than the secluded suite we'd been staying in. Still, neither Julie nor I slept. Every small sound outside made us sit up. Every voice in the hallway made us wonder if someone had found us again. At around 6 in the morning, we gave up trying to sleep. Our shuttle to the airport wasn't scheduled for another hour, so we packed the rest of our belongings and headed to the front desk to check out. The moment we arrived, one of the security managers approached us. "Would you mind waiting a few minutes?" I looked at Julie before nodding. He disappeared into a back office and returned carrying a laptop. We reviewed our surveillance footage from the last 2 days. My stomach tightened. He placed the laptop on the counter and started playing several security clips. The first video showed the pool area from the previous evening. Guests were laughing and walking around normally. Then a man entered the frame. He wasn't wearing swimwear. He wasn't carrying luggage. He wasn't talking to anyone. He simply walked around the edge of the pool while constantly looking in one direction. Our direction. The manager paused the video. "We've confirmed this man isn't registered as a guest." He clicked another recording. This one showed the pathway leading toward the hot tub. The same man appeared again. Instead of walking through the resort like everyone else, he stepped behind the tropical plants surrounding the hot tub. Then he crouched down, exactly where I had seen someone watching us. Julie quietly reached for my hand. The manager continued playing the footage. Several minutes later, I could be seen leaving the hot tub and chasing after the figure. The stranger disappeared into the darkness. Seconds before I reached the corner, I felt sick. Everything we'd experienced had actually happened. Then came another recording. This one was from the beach. Earlier that day. The same man appeared, wearing clothes almost identical to the resort staff. He walked directly toward us with a camera around his neck. He spent nearly a full minute photographing only us before calmly walking away. He never approached another guest. Not one. Security followed him through several different cameras. Eventually, he simply walked off the property. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. The final clip was the hardest to watch. It showed our building during the middle of the night. The timestamp read 1:17 a.m. The same man slowly walked toward our patio carrying the camera. He stood outside the screened enclosure for several minutes, completely motionless. Just staring into our room. The manager fast-forwarded the footage. The man never attempted to break inside. He simply watched us sleeping. Then, just before I woke up, he lifted the camera. A faint flash reflected through the screen. Seconds later, I jumped out of bed, and the man immediately ran into the darkness. The room fell silent. Nobody said a word. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "Did you find him?" The manager slowly shook his head. "We searched the property before sunrise. Nothing. We've reported everything to local authorities, but we don't know who he is." Julie looked completely shaken. "So he wasn't staying here?" "No. He entered the property from outside several different times." The manager apologized repeatedly for what had happened. To their credit, they handled the situation professionally once they realized how serious it was, but that didn't change the fact that a complete stranger had managed to follow us around one of the most secure resorts we'd ever visited. As our shuttle pulled away toward the airport, neither of us spoke much. I kept staring out the window, half expecting to see that same man standing somewhere along the road with his camera. Thankfully, I never did. A few days after returning home, I contacted the resort to ask if there had been any updates. They responded almost immediately. Unfortunately, there weren't any. The man had never been identified. No arrests were made. No explanation was ever discovered for why he had chosen us. That mystery has bothered me ever since. Sometimes people ask if I think he planned to rob us. Honestly, I don't. If money had been his goal, There were easier opportunities. Instead, he spent days secretly watching us, photographing us, following us from one side of the resort to the other, almost like we had become an obsession. Julie and I eventually went our separate ways for reasons completely unrelated to that trip. But every once in a while, one of us will send the other a random message that simply says, "Remember Costa Rica?" And instantly, we both know exactly which nightmare we're talking about. To this day, luxury resorts don't impress me the way they used to, because I learned something during that vacation. The most dangerous person isn't always the one hiding in a dark alley. Sometimes they're standing in plain sight, smiling, holding a camera, pretending they belong there.